Okay, I'm going to talk a bit about growing up and specifically how I think our culture and the emerging culture of the social web is having a detrimental effect on the way that children grow up. And then we're going to look into how we can help rediscover some of those timeless principles of growing up that can help counteract this trend. So just to start with a bit of context, can broadly distill the chaotic progress of the internet into three broad phases. The first phase, internet as portal, where you just typed in your URL and you went to a page. Second stage of search and the rise of the search engines. And the third age, which we're still in right now, the age of social. And we're going to focus specifically on the effects of this age of the social web. And I think the byproduct, really, of this third age of the social web is that we're exposing more of ourselves to others than we have ever done before. And it's also an age when we are on record more than ever before. Literally in the case of the Samsung Smart TV, who recently had to issue that statement warning people that anything they said or did in front of their TV was liable to being recorded. So yeah, terrifying. So we're in that state where we are exposing more of ourselves and we're being recorded more. And so we're kind of creating this culture of total exposure, if you will. So I want to just explore briefly the consequences of this state of affairs. Firstly, there's this emphasis on what people are calling social currency. We're continually probed to provide our status through social networks, aren't we? Facebook literally asks us for status updates. It says, what's on your mind? Twitter asks us what's happening. And there's a lot of pressure, isn't there, to be interesting, because we measure our status according to the approval of others, according to the number of likes and the number of retweets that we're receiving. And as a result, one of the effects of this is that we are increasingly publishing contrived versions of our true selves and of our true behaviour. This is a woman called Zilla van den Born, who's a Danish student who forged a very elaborate 6-week round-the-world trip. And she did this for her university thesis. So she did it all at home in a bedroom using Photoshop. And posted all of these images up to her social networks to give the impression that she was on this incredible round-the-world trip. And in her words, she said, "I did this to show people that we filter and manipulate what we show on social media. We create an ideal world online which reality can no longer meet. My goal was to prove how common and easy it is for people to distort reality. Everyone knows that pictures of models are manipulated, but we often overlooked the fact that we manipulate reality also in our own lives." Which is a very good point. And the second consequence related to this is that this culture of total exposure is that within this, nothing's escapable because everything is on record, and the media scrutinises everything that people in the public eye say, and they replay it back to us ad nauseum. This is Natalie Bennett, leader of the Green Party, who was just the most recent to suffer from this. She called it her brain fade during an interview on housing policy. Next week there'll be someone else. In the US presidential elections, there's bound to be dozens of examples there as well. But the point is, they can't escape their actions because they are recorded. And then there's a third consequence related to this, which is that the price of making mistakes is soaring. and the repercussions of making these mistakes are greater than they were a generation ago, perhaps, when we were growing up as children. This is the example of a couple of kids. They were, I don't know, 15, 16, and they'd heard those rumours that were in the press that the iPhone 6 would bend if you sat on it. So they went into an Apple store and they recorded footage of themselves bending it. And sure enough, you know, if they exerted enough force on it, it did bend, but all that just amounted to really was criminal damage. And they subsequently posted the footage of them doing that on YouTube. They ended up facing criminal charges that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. And the sad irony really about this example is that these kids almost certainly only did that in the first place because they have this YouTube channel and they're desperate to get views, so they thought, oh, what's, you know, some interesting content that I can create and post up there. So I'm going to focus the rest of this talk just on one particular group of people, on children, because I think that state of affairs that I've outlined represents a huge threat in particular to our children's development. And at worst, I believe that we're in this danger of creating an environment which actually harms children's natural development, because I think it's not giving them the conditions that they need in order to grow up in a normal, healthy way. This slightly creepy picture is from Little Miss Sunshine. Yeah, a few of you seen. And it's from the beauty pageant scene in that film. There's a whole separate debate to be had about the sexualisation of children. I'm not going to talk about that now, but I'm going to focus specifically on children's mental development. What's interesting about the kind of the development and education of children is that on the one hand we kind of fetishise and glamorise those kids who have that kind of entrepreneurial zeal and spark. This is Jamal Edwards, who is just the kind of current poster boy for the entrepreneurial youth of Britain, and you know, everyone from celebrities to brands to the government are kind of trying to get a piece of him. But there's a real irony in this, because actually entrepreneurship flourishes in our education system in spite of our schooling, not because of it. If you think of a lot of the people we consider to be entrepreneurs, so you know, Richard Branson, Alan Sugar, those guys, you know, Zuckerberg, lots of those people are actually kind of high school or college dropouts. So they kind of went against the educational norms. This is Thomas Gradgrind, a character, the headmaster from Dickens's Hard Times. And he kind of really epitomised what I think is still the problem with our education. He said, now what I want is facts. Teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. Facts alone are wanted in life. You can only form the minds of reasoning animals upon facts. Nothing else will ever be of any service to them. So that was written by Dickens 150 years ago. Cut forward to the present day, and you have the modern day Gradgrind in our Education Minister, Michael Gove. And for him to prove success, because of course everything is measured and evaluated in modern politics, it has to be, education has to be measured in binary terms. So he places more emphasis on literacy, you know, are you literate, are you illiterate? He places more emphasis on literacy than he does on creativity, because it's easier to quantify, it's easier to measure. But what this means by placing such an onus on just passing exams and being literate is that rather than learning from mistakes, children are learning to avoid mistakes, because that's how education works. It's just about passing tests. And this is clearly a problem for our children's development, because it goes against their nature. As children, we are all innately curious people. In fact, I read the other day that between the ages of 3 and 5, the average child asks 40,000 questions. That's an average of 35 questions a day. So yeah, the parents are nodding. Probably feels like more than that sometimes. And the problem with this state of our education is that the way that we're educating kids makes them more conscious of getting things right than expressing themselves or attempting the untried. The educationist Sir Ken Robinson puts it very pithily in his talk, How Schools Kill Creativity. He says, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. I'm certainly in agreement with him that the way our education is set up is not providing children sufficient means to get things wrong and try things and come up with original things. And this extends beyond schools. I know I'm focusing on children, but it has kind of wider implications as well. A common criticism of English sport, certainly in recent times, has been the preoccupation of science and statistics in an attempt to strip all the risks out of playing natural game and really kind of exploiting our natural flair. And this has paralysed our players' natural creativity. And there are numerous examples of those kind of the individuals, the creative mavericks who don't fit into the institution. So, the Paul Gascoignes, the Kevin Petersons and such on. And in some ways this is nothing new. Picasso identified the same problem over 50 years ago. He said that every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once we grow up. But that was 50 years ago, but it's a problem now more than ever before. This is it's a killer chart, this one, isn't it? 40 years ago, so if you look at the orange line, you can see look at the white line. 40 years ago, 40% of jobs were non-routine, whereas 60% of jobs, the orange line, were routine. Now it's flipped completely the other way around as more jobs have become robotised, for want of a better word. And what this means is that as we introduce more and more robots into the workplace and into different work streams, it will place an increased premium on creativity and the human ability to do non-routine work. Interestingly, the word robot was invented by the Czech writer Karel Čapek and comes from the Czech word robota, which means forced labour or drudgery. So we should think about non-robotised work to be the complete opposite of that, and really kind of just making the most of our creative and curious instincts. Just recently at South by, we saw an organisation called Stop the Robots protesting. And the reason they were protesting was to make sure that AI and robots empower humans rather than replace humans. That's a really interesting and arguably important statement to make, but we have a responsibility to make sure that as humans we are offering unique capabilities that AI and robots can't offer. So clearly there's a state of affairs there and a problem. So what do we do to address it? Well, I think just going back to Little Miss Sunshine, I think the answer lies with Olive, the protagonist in Little Miss Sunshine. Even if you haven't seen that film, what makes her so endearing to the audience is really her naivety, and that's what makes her final performance in the beauty pageant so funny but so kind of poignant and touching at the same time. And it's so wonderful because it really contrasts so beautifully with the excruciatingly adult performances of the other little girls in the beauty pageant. And I think, going back to that point that Picasso made about trying to retain that sense of being an artist as we grow up, I think what he was really referring to is naivety. And what's interesting about the word naive is that typically when people use the word naive, when they describe someone or someone's actions as naive, it typically has negative connotations. But actually, out of the three of the definitions, the dictionary.com definitions anyway, out of three of the definitions, two of them are wholly positive. So having or showing unaffected simplicity of nature or absence of artificiality. That sounds pretty positive to me, right? And likewise, having or marked by a simple, unaffectedly direct style reflecting little or no formal training or technique. It sounds interesting. It sounds like that could lead to a really interesting creative place. But back to the context that I set up at the start, I believe we're in danger of creating a culture where there is no place for naivety. And this is a fundamental problem because naivety leads to curiosity and curiosity leads to creativity. So it's absolutely essential that we retain the ability to be naive and let children be comfortable with being naive. And it's not just important to children, it's important, it shouldn't be confined to them, and we need to retain it throughout our lives. This is a painting by the Croatian artist Ivan Generalic. If you go to Zagreb, you can check out his work in the Museum of Naive Art, which is has a very strong heritage in Croatia. And also beyond that, just thinking about our day jobs as marketers and advertisers, there's a very direct relevance to the world of brands. Forbes released they released their annual most powerful brands table, and this is the list from this year. So you got some pretty big familiar blue chip names, but also the likes of Red Bull and Burberry and Rolex and Ferrari and Nike. So some glamorous names up there. Anyone guess what? Yeah, exactly. The most powerful brand is Lego, according to Forbes. And that to me is really interesting because Lego is absolutely the embodiment of creativity, and it really kind of supports that naive mindset that I think we should be looking to promote more. This is a beautiful TV ad from 1981, which you may have seen, called Kipper. But it really kind of shows really the power of Lego and the reason why it became so successful. And it's because there is no there's no wrong way to do it. It is pure imagination. So I'm just going to let you see this.
You see, I was staying outside my mouth hole the other day, but all of a sudden, along comes this cat. So with a flash, I turned into a dog. But the cat turned into a dragon. So I turned into a fire engine. And then he turned into a submarine. So I became a submarine-eating kipper. I said a kipper, not a slipper. Never mind. But he turned into an anti-kipper ballistic missile. So I turned into a missile cruncher. Crunch, 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 crunch. Just in time to see him change into a very, very big elephant. So do you know what I did then? I turned back into a mouse, and I did the shredded line, just like that.
Not actually Tommy Keeper, just someone doing a very good impression of Tommy Keeper. I don't think they could afford the rights. But what's quite interesting is you contrast that to the recent Lego movie came out last year. And actually, as that movie points out, even Lego is at risk of losing its primary function of nurturing imagination and curiosity. And that's because it's kind of at risk of becoming subsumed by these commercial franchises, you know, Star Wars and such like, that really, you know, have been of incredible commercial success to Lego. But actually, if you think about the child using it's really primarily fueling consumerism rather than creativity. And Lego Play, as a consequence, has evolved from being something that was imagination driven to something that is more routine based. So follow the instructions to build the Starship Enterprise. And actually, just recently, the Lego were heavily criticised in the media for offering, this is on the left, for offering beauty tips to girls aged 5 years old. Well, someone pointed out this major contrast to how Lego talked about beauty 30 years ago, and back then what was beautiful in their eyes was just a wonderful construction of Lego that clearly hadn't been put together following any particular instructions, but it was beautiful because it reflects this young girl's imagination. This problem isn't restricted to brands. We're complicit in ourselves, aren't we? We have these models that we put together to help our clients buy our ideas and try to create some rational order in order for them to buy our creativity. And that's not to say that's wrong. There is a time and a place for these types of models. But it's about how we can balance this with a way of operating that encourages naive thinking. So how do we protect our state of naivety? Well, I think there are a few things we can do, but then I want to open it up to a discussion. We can start with bringing in naive references and inspiration from outside our brand's worlds. We all know the categories in which our brands operate really well, and so do our clients. But I think we can create interesting different perspectives and naive perspectives if we just inject completely different sort of tangential references. And I think the inspiration that we should supply with our creative briefs should have a healthy dose of naivety to provide that. Secondly, in much the same way that in the Ryder Cup, the golf tournament between the US and Europe, the captains of the Ryder Cup, they have 2 to 4 wild card picks, as they call them. So these are the guys who aren't necessarily in the top 10 golfers in the world, but they're the guys who the captains think could just be their clutch player on the day, just because they've got something about them. They've got kind of that grit and that kind of different way of approaching a problem. And I think we should do something similar. We should collaborate potentially with naive disciplines outside of the industry and outside of Iris as an agency, and think of perhaps who are our naive agents that we can bring in, who are unencumbered with all that baggage that we have, that we know from working on a particular brand or client for years and years. And then thirdly, I think we can think kind of beyond the agency and outside in the real world, and we can set the parameters for our brands to exist. But we should leave a certain amount open so that the people that we partner with or the work that that we're inviting, whether it's user generated from the public, whatever it is. But we should leave scope open for a little naivety to flourish, just as we did with the work on Robinson Squash. We briefed these guys and said, look, we want you to use this product as an imaginative way as you want. And then we kind of left it up to them. And I think the work was much more compelling for doing that, rather than if we just give them a script and said, this is exactly what we want you to see you doing with this product. So I'm just going to leave you now with a quote from Alice in Wonderland, which I think really beautifully sums up my take on this subject, and the reason why I think it's important that we are creating the grounds for naivety and naive thinking. One day Alice came to a fork in the road and saw a Cheshire cat in a tree. "Which road do I take?" she said. "Where do you want to go?" was his response. "I don't know," Alice answered. "Then," said the cat, "it doesn't matter." Or to put it another way, if you retain a naive mindset, you might just find yourself going in the slightly more interesting direction.